What is up, guys? Welcome to another episode of The Meaning of Podcast. I am Ace.
This is RB3.
And this is the podcast where we get into the deeper meaning of your favorite filmmakers' movies. And it's another hot day in Southern California, guys. We are sweating right now because it's hot. And it's February.
Yeah, I mean,
it's hot.
They say climate change. I think we kind of confirmed.
If climate change isn't real, then God's just mad.
Yeah,
he's just pissed off
mad at
right
California,
now.
man.
He's just really mad right now.
At least 90, and I'm wearing a long sleeve shirt. I don't know what's happening.
And you're wearing a Lakers shirt in my house.
I know.
You dare?
Hey.
You dare?
Hey, number 2, big baller brand, Lonzo Ball. If you're watching,
oh my God,
I'm a fan.
Lonzo Ball, man, he's Let's not get into
Yeah. I mean,
failed. It's called failed experiment.
Wait, not failed. All right, he does pretty good. They got him coming off the bench now. He's working a little.
Coming off the bench.
He got it.
The guy that was gonna change the Lakers forever is coming off the bench.
Hey, Kyle Kuzma, though, that man, that boy's.
He's good. I like Kuzma.
Yeah. The reason I'm wearing this, by the way, if we a little transparency. The Super Bowl is today, the day we're filming this.
No, it's not. What?
I'm sorry. We're live, people. This is live.
This is
Tuesday,
totally
10
live.
a.m.
What are you talking about?
Yeah. But yeah, Super Bowl. It looks like the Eagles are pulling ahead. We're kind of have the game.
Yeah.
Like on the sidelines here, but
what does the Lakers have to do with the Super Bowl?
Well, I mean, this is the shit. This is my only sports jersey. You know what I mean? So I wanted to represent somehow.
To be just so you guys know, obviously I'm a Suns fan, so there's one.
Yeah, there's tension here.
I'm pissed off. I'm angry. You wearing that jersey in my house?
Yeah, especially the away jersey too. Like I'm coming to your house.
Yeah, exactly. Bringing that dirt in my house, man. Leaving it all over the carpet, man. Come on.
Hey, man. Hey, Lakers, I got to represent LA love. But sorry for all the audio listeners. If you can't tell by this point, I'm wearing a Laker jersey. Ace is just wearing a green shirt. So we're really moving now.
Yeah, audio listeners are like, man, this podcast just turned whack. I'm turning this off. They're removing their headphones like Aaron Sorkin last week. Speaking of Aaron Sorkin, if you thought Alexander Payne was popping, Aaron Sorkin, man. All them Aaron Sorkin fans that I thought were out there were not out there.
Yeah.
Or at least not for our podcast, because not a lot of people listen, but that's totally okay. We're still going to read the comments from last week's episode for people who did listen. We're excited about this week as well because we're going to be, you can introduce it kind of, but all month we're going to have a theme going on.
Yeah, I mean, it's Black History Month, obviously, February. And since we're two young, woke dudes, we figured, hey, why not we start, why don't we use the month and celebrate the plethora of African-American filmmakers that, we should celebrate. So I guess today's episode is we're going to just do an overall kind of look and overview of how Black cinema has kind of evolved from the bare bones beginning and the early cinema of 1920s to all the way till today. So
yeah, absolutely.
Very exciting topic.
So this one is going to be a little bit of a kind of like a history class for you guys, or kind of like a class in general. But again, tune in, guys, because it is relevant and it is really it's gonna be cool. We'll make it fun for you guys and we'll make it interesting. It won't be like a boring class that you'll take in school or something.
Yeah.
But then each week following that, we're probably gonna get into some other big time Black directors that have been either in the past or in the present that have developed some great films, and we'll get more into that as well. Right. Obviously, we're going to do probably a Coogler episode for Black Panther, which I'm excited about because he's made some of my favorite movies, to be honest. And each week we'll get into some bigger ones as well. I'm sure we'll do Spike down the line as well.
Spike
Sometime this month we'll do Spike Lee, which is a big one too. He's just got a lot of movies, so I just got to make sure time to watch it all. So
that's the plethora of Black filmmakers. Is Spike Lee? He's been in the business the longest. We're going to talk about that a little bit today too. So.
Yeah, and he's a Knicks fan, so there you go. He's calling your team out, RB3. Let's read some comments from last week. Obviously, one of our favorite homies, Ibrahim Hamid, we see you, man. He says, hi, guys. I would like to say that I didn't mind that Ace made fun of Three Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, although it is in my top 5 films of the year. I found it rather funny, and I laughed out loud a lot. So there you go. He liked the movie. I poked fun at it, and he was cool with it. That's weird. That doesn't happen a lot in the internet.
No. Usually the opinions are put at the forefront no matter what. So
good friend of the Schmoville and good friend of Schmoes, Jen Kemp, said, "This was an excellent topic idea. Writers are the lifeblood of so many fantastic films, but go unnoticed by the general public. Luckily, Sorkin's style is so iconic that it's a challenge not to notice it when he's involved in a project. I wish I could have a conversation in real life as quick and as witty as his dialogue is. Go see Molly's Game, everybody. It's fascinating and hilarious." Have you seen Molly's Game yet?
I still haven't seen it, man.
Yeah. Molly's Game is actually really... I liked Molly's Game a lot.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Now, do you think if you would have seen it before the top 10 list episode, would it have made it on? Or
To be honest, probably not.
Right,
no,
not,
it's a good... I would probably say good top 15 for me. You know, because the ones outside of my top 15 were like... what did I say? Darkest Hour was one. Lost City of Z was probably another. I would put Molly's Game in there as well. But yeah, I don't see it as a film that would have competed heavily against specifically the Oscars. I wouldn't say it's a snub necessarily.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
for sure. Even though it did get a screenplay for Sorkin.
Yeah, I think it got a screenplay nomination. Yeah, best adapted
for Sorkin. So
yeah,
Molly's Game is definitely a good movie, and I definitely recommend seeing it. Gunslinger 199 says Sorkin is one of my favorite writers in Hollywood. He should do a Captain America movie. Great job, guys. Do Martin McDonagh next. Yeah, Martin McDonagh, man. Eventually, we'll do a Martin McDonagh episode. We just kind of want to give it a little space between Sorkin, because that Sorkin episode was so much fire.
Right.
All their fans, we were like, man, there's a lot of Sorkin fans. There must be a lot of Martin McDonagh fans.
yeah. Like I think the thing is, like, we have done such big names before in the past that I feel like when we go for somebody a little more indie, it's a little tough. But I mean, that being said, though, I mean, I think the discussion that we had about Aaron Sorkin was really like refreshing and dope. So
yeah.
And I think the discussion that we might eventually have about Martin McDonagh, I mean, he made some of my favorites. Seven Psychopaths is one of my favorite just movies. And In Bruges, it was In Bruges or
In Bruges?
In Bruges. In Bruges is another a lot of people consider classic, Colin Farrell. And of course, Three Billboards, which we both yet to see. So
I will see it. I guarantee it. I mean, I definitely will see that movie. I have to, because I've just said so much about it without seeing it. So now I kind of have to see it.
All right.
But absolutely, guys, we definitely appreciate your comments that come in every week, and we will continue to read them every week, because we do appreciate you guys, and comments are probably the best way that you can communicate with us how you're feeling about the episode, what you thought of the episode, what your favorites were, how the conversation went, et cetera, et cetera. And obviously for the iTunes listeners as well, we appreciate you guys.
Yeah, they could tweet at us if they have like questions too. Tweet at us, Facebook message, or Facebook, tag us, and do it all, man. We're up on every social media, so.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Cool. Let's jump into this week's episode, which we're going to be talking about Black cinema and the history of Black cinema. This is such a great topic, obviously because it's Black History Month, but I do feel like, especially now with the Academy Awards, recognizing different types of directors instead of one traditional type of director, specifically when it comes to Black directors and when it comes to just movie that feature Black people in general, right? Because we've had conversations about this before when we talked about Steven Spielberg, when we talked about kind of the roles that we see Black people take in Hollywood, whether and how in a way it kind of hasn't changed that much, which is kind of not a good sign, right? Because like in the 60s and 70s you had Black people playing kind of like maids and stuff.
Yeah.
And then in the 2000s and present you have Black people playing like maids and stuff.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, it's an interesting topic because we're starting to see progression where we should have seen progression a lot earlier.
Yeah, I mean, Hollywood's always been like a stagnant place in terms of like moving forward and reflecting a more broader sense of culture. And I think that's definitely, I mean, you could just see in like any classic movies, there's not a lot of people of color just being represented at all. And the people who are, it's usually like very stereotypical, or it's like, white, it's not, I shouldn't say whitewash, but like brown face or black face or yellow face in a lot of cases as well. But I feel like now that we're moving into 2018 and we're starting to see more African-American voices gain a lot of relevancy. I mean, we were talking about in our Oscar episode, Jordan Peele getting nominated, Dee Reeves's Mudbound getting a lot of recognition. So I think the matter of representation is definitely coming more to the forefront more and more. But when we look back at the past of Hollywood, you can see that a lot of times African American filmmakers just had to carve out their own paths and their own lanes, in order to move up and succeed to the next steps.
And we're also seeing filmmakers put black characters in a different light, right? We're starting to see them be not necessarily underdogs coming from the dirt and making their way up, but actually starting from the top. Kind of like a movie like Creed, right? Where
Right.
Adonis plays a character who is already at the top, and he's a successful guy, and he just loves fighting, and he's inspired by his father, who died in the ring, and he was able to accomplish even greater things that he was already set out for. Or like a Jordan Peele with the Get Out, who has a character like Chris be the smart guy and be the one who to outsmart the smart white people who are like doing these creepy science experiments.
Right.
But
right,
we have a different interpretation of black characters in movies now, because we have directors who are not stupid and who see that, hey, let's make these characters slightly different than how they're usually portrayed.
Right. No, exactly. And I think that's you mentioned Creed and Get Out, both movies directed by African American directors. So again, so when you have proper representation behind the camera, what we see on screen becomes a lot more powerful and relevant, and a lot more reflective of the overall zeitgeist of the country.
Absolutely. And something I know too is that you had a film, right? A short film that you did.
Yeah. Back
Did you
when,
do it for high school?
Yeah, in high school. Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. Back in high school, I did a short film on the legacy of Oscar Micheaux, who is often considered the first African American filmmaker. He's made his moves in Hollywood by first writing a novel, The Homesteader, and then adapting that into his own like feature motion picture, like 1919. So very early on. Anyway, I did a documentary on that in high school and ended up winning like History Day awards. It was part of a class, but then stuff like that. But going to more towards the legacy of Oscar Micheaux, though. He is, like I said, considered the first African American filmmaker, and he is known for kind of being one of the first ones to put like African Americans in the age of like the silent films, and make it not like make it a unique perspective, because a lot of times what we were seeing back in the early days, especially in the 1910s with silent cinema, was The Birth of a Nation, right? Not the new Nate Parker version, but the old version, which was a highly problematic and frankly like racist movie. It depicted a lot of blackface. It depicted a lot of negative stereotypes of African Americans.
Yeah, it was if I remember it correctly, it was like a lot of white people in blackface, and they would depict like African American men as like super aggressive and kind of evil in a way.
Yeah, like there's scenes like raping and
trying to kill white women.
Yeah, it's really be frank, it's like KKK propaganda. Like.
Sure.
And this was before the KKK was like seen nationwide as like a terrorist group. This is back in like 1910, so it was like a lot of people just kind of saw it as like, oh, a Banding of Brothers kind of movie, with some really troubling racial undertones. So when that film came out, but again, like we talk about that movie and celebrate that movie because it's also, one of the first movies that like introduced a lot of the storytelling elements that we see in modern cinema today, like the idea of the close-up and all that stuff. So W.D. Griffith did that with The Birth of a Nation, which fed up like African American communities, obviously, and so far as somebody like Oscar Micheaux. So he decided to start making pictures themselves, like that were independently produced and financed. He went out and bought his own camera, and he would take the films that he would make and like literally be carrying them in his arms to like different like African American theaters in Chicago, and sell them that way. So it was literally the definition of independent filmmaking. There weren't like a lot of studios weren't investing in African American films because frankly, at that time it was seen as controversial. So, but because of like Oscar Micheaux and putting like a new face on like African American cinema, we eventually studios started to get the idea of using African Americans as like their faces for singers and dancers, particularly when sound came into the picture, like the late 1920s, 1930s. Examples we see of this is something like King Voder's Hallelujah, which is like a 1929 movie about basically like a lot of black people. I think the cast is like 340 black people in this movie. Just and it's a musical and it's a drama though, and you know they're utilizing because frankly a lot of blues singers at the time were African Americans, so they figured do it that way. But then going towards jazz singers though, there was the jazz singer the movie with homeboy, I can't remember his name, but he's known for like dancing and singing really well. But there's also an element of blackface that happens in a lot of that work too. So again, back in the early days of cinema, it was a little murky as to where the representation really lied. But later on, we finally started seeing some kind of change, I guess, with like Gone with the Wind came out in like 1939, and
Okay.
that was the film that actually had the first African American to ever win an Academy Award for Hattie McDaniel's performance. But in that movie, she's playing a maid, so it's like it's again, it's a lot going on here. Yeah.
Do you feel like the type of representation that we're seeing in the 30s and in that era kind of was it more like a, how do I say this, like a weird odd fascination with black people as like, look at these black people coming in and with their so many talents and all this stuff, let's put them on screen, and it wasn't necessarily like a proper representation of who they were because it was told from a white person's perspective.
Right, right, right. I mean, for the most part, especially with early like big studio stuff, yeah. I mean, it was mostly the fascination with the outsider, and that's not even just with African Americans. That's just in general with film, right? The whole idea of the adventure movie is going to a foreign nation, especially back in those days, going to a foreign nation and seeing all of these weird like Indian people, or a lot of times they'll go to jungles and see like cavemen and all that shit. Where, probably in that time, it probably were like some not as developed countries, or whatever, but there was no understanding of what was really outside of America besides what we see in like novels like adventure novels back in like the 1910s, 1920s. So again, like there was never really thought put into what kind of representation was happening for characters that were outside of of cinema. And again, during that time there wasn't even a lot of like African American movie theaters, frankly. There's so much segregation and having all of these different, a lot of times, like I said, Oscar Micheaux would take his films to specifically African American, they called Negro theaters back in the days, and give them and sell the films there. Because frankly, like white theaters are all owned by the movie studios, and the movie studios weren't interested in showing movies that were outside of their system. So,
Sure.
yeah, there wasn't a lot to be shown to begin with.
What followed after the 1939 Gone with the Wind? Did that change anything specifically with
Not specifically. Again, this is the big studio system still happening, and a lot of times, again, it's like you find black people in supporting roles in the background as maids, as whatever. So, but when we move into like the 1950s, when like the studio system starts falling apart and there becomes a bigger growth of like African American, not I'm sorry, not African independent cinema outside of the studios, we start to see some different and interesting stories. There's the one very early Nick Cassavetes film that it was in black and white, and the whole idea is that this white dude is dating a African American woman, but she's super like light skinned, so she basically like looks white. But it's like this whole secret that's happening. And so again, independent filmmakers are tackling like these really tough, like weird ideas and concerning African Americans on screen. But it's also due partially because more representation during that time, also partially because of the rise of the star of Sidney Poitier. Now, Sidney Poitier really got his footing in like the late 50s, early 1960s with movies like Lilies of the Field, A Raisin in the Sun, like all these like really heavy African American dramas. And because, a lot of times they're adapted from stage plays put on to film, it was like an interesting like dynamic, like this theatricality towards what Sidney Poitier was presenting. So then he as an actor began growing and growing more and more. And as that happened, we start to see like a new kind of wave of African Americans in like studio pictures. So Sidney Poitier in particular, in 1967, he had two movies that were nominated for Best Picture. He had In the Heat of the Night, which was the cop movie that's set in Mississippi. A lot of times considered one of the great like crime dramas of all time. And of course, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, which is the big, which is another big kind of seminal moment in African American cinema.
What year was that, by the way?
It's 1967.
Okay.
So this is at the height of the civil rights movement. Particularly with Guess Who's Coming Home for Dinner. This was coming right after the big Virginia versus Love court case that allowed interracial marriage to become legal in the United States. So Guess Who's Coming Home for Dinner was like a reflection of that. Obviously, if you haven't seen that movie, that is a film starring Spencer Tracy, Katharine Hepburn, Sidney Poitier, and I forget who plays like the main daughter in this, but and this, you know, that's another thing to mention too. The fact that like Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn, they have this like long history of doing films together, and seen as like an iconic Hollywood couple. This was their last film they ever did together. Right before Spencer Tracy passed away, I believe he passed away in 1969. So this was literally his last movie. But that being said, having that, you know, they represent like the older generation, and having, you know, Sidney Poitier kind of representing the new person coming in the small town like San Francisco, where they're having all these debates of whether or not it's okay to have interracial marriage or interracial dating and all of that stuff. So, you know, again, in that time, there was a lot of studios starting to adapt some of these ideas. And again, height of the civil rights movement, Martin Luther King, right before the Civil Rights Act passed 1965 or 1968 or something like that. But anyway, but you get what I'm saying though, right? Like there's a lot happening in the country that influenced that movie to become big. And to, like I said, the Sidney Poitier, 2 Best Picture nominees in 1 year.
So that movie, it was seen by a lot of people, and it did spark a lot of imitations off of it. Right?
Yeah, yeah.
It sparked a lot of new ideas for people to be like, "Oh, that's an interesting idea. I can make something similar into a movie based on that." Right?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think the general reaction to some of these films were, particularly with Guess Who's Coming Home to Dinner. Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. I feel like a lot of white audiences connected to it on a certain level, but then there's also a certain segment of African American audiences who just kind of saw it as, you know, kind of not really representing the issues that they were having. And there's other films that were coming out during that time too. I know in 1964 there was like this independent film, Nothing But a Man, that was just straight up about like a black man's struggle in America. And it's like a story of him going to work and trying to take care of his daughter and all that stuff. Black and white picture too, 1964. But again, so that's where some audiences were looking for more of their entertainment. But then in the 1970s, though, we start to see like another movement more towards the lane of blaxploitation. Now, blaxploitation is like a subgenre of film that's essentially just like the Shafts and the Sweet Badasses of films, just like these like really hyper masculine African American protagonists. And when I say masculine, they're not necessarily all male characters. It's also like Foxy Brown and all these different characters. But blaxploitation is essentially like putting heroes in like Harlem, but making them like super masculine. They sleep with like all the women, being like the coolest cats. A lot of times directed by, I mean, at least when thinking about the very first one, Sweet Badass, that movie's directed by Melvin Ben Peebles, largely one of the other big known African American filmmakers, particularly in the 1970s. That movie kind of kicked off the blaxploitation movement. But then a lot of, you know, white directors started coming in and doing their thing too. But again, that era produced a lot of big movies, like I said, Shaft, Cotton Comes to Harlem, a lot of seminal African American portrayals that we started to see.
What were those movies directed towards? Towards white audiences, towards black audiences, towards both?
I think it was more seen towards gearing towards black audiences because, like I said, a lot of times people, and again, when you think about Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, that's a more pandering towards white audiences in terms of acceptance, right? But black exploitation is just straight up like, no, here's a black action movie with, that everybody.
With a black guy kicking ass.
Right, exactly, yeah. And and I think even the reminiscences of black exploitation even still kind of lives on today. I mean, obviously we just saw Proud Mary come out earlier 2018. The remake of Shaft, and then remaking the remake, and of course, the Black Dynamite that came out in like 2005 with like Eddie Griffin. So black exploitation was such a big part of what, and again, that's also due to the fact that now in the 1970s there were more radical movements in African American communities, such as like the Black Panthers, or a lot of times what Malcolm X was talking about was self defense, but people interpolate that as more like violence. So then a lot of people kind of assimilated the sense of violence with black heroism. So and that's kind of how exploitation films kind of
Just to jump in a little bit on that. I don't know a lot about this obviously, but I do know about comics. Luke Cage came from that.
Yeah.
Too. Luke Cage came from black exploitation, kind of like this guy in Harlem just kicking ass and super strong. Hangs out with I forget her name, Misty Knight.
Yeah.
Misty Knight with the fro and with everything going on, and she has like this mechanical cool shooting arm and stuff like that. So, and then we saw Luke Cage come out, what was it, like 2 years ago, the show?
Yeah.
So that comes from that too.
Oh, and if you want to look for a show that like kind of perfectly embodies the tone and like the energy that these black exploitation movies have, I mean, Luke Cage is like the example, because just down to like the music, like the way it's cut, it's edited, kind of resembles a lot of that. The story beats, I know a lot of people had like a problem with the twist they happened at, like
With Cottonmouth?
Yeah. But that's something that is you could definitely see that in a black exploitation kind of movie. So it's interesting that Luke Cage kind of spawned after that, and with Black Panther, that's hitting theaters really soon. A lot of people think that Black Panther was named after the movement, the Black Panther movement, which is actually not the case. The first Black Panther comic book was released in July of 1966, but the Black Panther movement didn't actually officially have their name of the Black Panthers before November of 1966. So it's like a couple of months difference, but a lot of people, are like thinking of protesting Black Panther because they're like, oh, it's associated with like a violent hate group, which is not the case.
Yeah.
That's just like literally wrong,
Yeah.
time wise. So, but yeah, but again, like that, that era kind of birthed a lot of what we see in modern cinema and pop culture today.
Well, before you move on, I want to know how do people nowadays view black exploitation in that specific era? Do they view it in a positive light, or do they view it in a light? I'm just curious.
I think a lot of people see it in more of a negative light because it's very, like I said, it's like hyper masculine, and it's so over the top where I believe like even Melvin Ben Peebles, who started in I think it's Sweet Baby Badass, something like that, but that's the first like big exploitation movie. But I think it's the story is like he actually got an STD while filming that because he was like so much like sex like that was involved in the making of that movie, and because he starred in it as well. And that's the thing, like a lot of times with African American filmmakers, they start in their own films to get, for one, recognition, but for two, there weren't a lot of black actors working back then. Especially if they're working in Hollywood in the studio system, they definitely weren't trying to like do something like edgy and risky as something like that. So, but again, this in terms of public perception now, I think, like I said, the hypermasculinity is a problem. The violence is a problem for a lot of people. And it's still like overall kind of pandering to a lot of stereotypes.
Sure.
That it makes the stereotypes cool, no doubt. And I think that even somebody like Tarantino kind of washed a lot of black exploitation and kind of uses like the attitude and the coolness of that era of film into, you know, his characters like Jules from Pulp Fiction, or anything Samuel Jackson's in.
Yeah,
And they
Hateful
turn
Eight
to
too.
Hateful Eight, yeah. So
I forget his character's name, but yeah.
well, yeah, but it kind of evokes like that. But imagine if that's your movie. That if Samuel Jackson is in every Tarantino movie like that, imagine that being every black movie happening in like the 1960s, 1970s. So again, that, you know, I think that turns a lot of people off.
Did the studio system see these movies as an opportunity to reach like an untapped market? Were they like, yo, there's a lot of black people that want to see movies with black people kicking ass. We should let this guy make his movie, kind of thing.
Right. It was, you know, it's seen as like B movies basically. Like,
Okay.
Yeah. Just like cheap, throwaway.
Okay,
You know,
so
like
they were like, it's not going to cost us anything, and they want to make it.
and
So.
make some money off of it. Yeah. Especially again, like film just continues to grow and grow more and more as time goes on. So the audiences, of course, are going to have like a much larger reach. But then, you know, when we go into like the 80s, it's kind of a different change, where we start to see some different kind of more young voices come into prominence. And I think, you know, particularly when we speak on filmmakers from the 80s who left the biggest impact, there's no doubt that that's Spike Lee. We're going to do a Spike Lee episode obviously later, but with Spike Lee, he came out of the gates with movies like She Gotta Have It, Do the Right Thing.
What year is Do the Right? Was that 89 or
That's 89, yeah.
Okay.
So that's like at the tail end of the 80s. But
Sure.
he had other ones that came out, School Days before that, and She Gotta Have It. So these are very like, you know, it kind of presents the African American life as not really a struggle, but it's just part of the day to day of being black. And Spike Lee just kind of managed to like maneuver himself through the system and become like his own like name and figure, and start off, you know, independently producing his own stuff. And then that made such a big splash that, you know, studios obviously became interested in seeing what Spike Lee was doing. And it also helps that Spike Lee was coming from New York, so he had, and, you know, he graduated from NYU, so literally his, you know, at NYU his professors were like Martin Scorsese and like Oliver Stone. And so there's that overall, he had like a great sense of filmmaking and style and everything too. So I think that what Spike Lee was doing, and I think on top of that, just in the broader sense of pop culture, we start to see in the 80s where the breakout of like hip hop music was starting to slowly rise up. Pop music was Michael Jackson and Prince. Mm-hmm. So then other like examples of black cinema comes in like Purple Rain with Prince, like that film. And of course, Michael Jackson having his own kind of, he wasn't really in a lot of big movies, but his music videos are playing all the time on MTV, even to the point where Martin Scorsese made that a music video for Bad, 25, you know, it's like a 25-minute short film. So again, like these are all kind of culminating into seeing more prominent figures in African American cinema. And I think when you go to Do the Right Thing, which came out in 1989, same weekend as the first Batman movie, by the way, Tim Burton's Batman. But yeah, when that movie comes out and it has like this gigantic hip hop song that's just crusading through the entire thing, Fight the Power by Public Enemy. And you have this like really relevant topic, especially in the 1980s and unfortunately all the way to this day, of police brutality. But then it's also showing like a different side of New York than a lot of people are used to seeing, where it's about black people and brown people all living together, and the Korean shop owners and Sal's famous pizzeria, which, you know, is like the white-owned business being in the black community, because, you know, especially then, the African American community didn't have the same resources to start their own businesses in their own communities, right? So I think that's where Spike kind of brings in and has this whole larger message and context. And the movie is obviously bookended by quotes from Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X. So it also has a very relevant political aspect too.
I'm curious too, because I feel like at this moment in the 80s, you said it already, but I just kind of want to get into it a little bit more, is the fact that so many people now are listening to music made by black people, sung by black people, specifically with hip hop. And obviously hip hop, like, you're so right. I know a lot about hip hop just because I studied hip hop for a long time, and hip hop is a big part of my life. And I know that this is the late 80s is when it was just popping. It was just blowing up. And that's what a lot of what music does is it drives what you see in screen as well. And I feel like that has a big aspect of people kind of accepting different views when they say, because I mean, obviously, as you people know nowadays, too, white people love hip hop.
Yeah.
So when
yeah,
white
yeah.
people love hip hop too, is they start accepting more of these, different perspectives and different aspects of film and seeing more black people on film because they correlate that to the music as well. Because music is such a big factor of Do the Right Thing. It's huge in that movie. I mean, the opening is absolutely like, is one of the most well-known openings, at least for me. I know that opening by heart because I've seen it so many times, but that's all based on dance and music, right? Something that's so ingrained in American culture now.
Right, and I mean that's not to mention the whole look at athletes becoming the biggest part of of the culture as well, and of course you could trace that all the way back to the 1940s too with Jackie Robinson, and I think they even made a movie back in that time, like a documentary, the Jackie Robinson story. So there were some people who were starting to cover more African American. More African American athletes and transporting them more into like the documentary or film route. Speaking of documentaries, there are a lot of documentaries back in the days that concerned not necessarily life in America, but like life in like third world countries like Africa, stuff like that. So it's like another layer of representation. It's very small, like very, very small corner of Hollywood was like actually ready to explore a lot of that stuff. But it's just fascinating that even to this day, it kind of all builds upon each other more and more. And I think that's especially true when you're considering, like with Spike Lee having such a powerful position on a lot of these issues, like athleticism, like music. I mean, these are all topics that are up for debate and Do the Right Thing by each individual character. And I know a lot of times when you think about like African American supporting roles. I mean, let me go back to one example too. Like when you think about Rocky, the first thing you think about is Sylvester Stallone, right? Not a lot of people think about Apollo Creed as like a central figure in that movie, but he's essentially one of the driving powers in that film. But
what year is that again?
That's 1976.
Yeah.
And that's a movie that represents that represents a powerful African American figure. Now the only problem with that is they kind of also present him as the villain, right? Or at least the obstacle that Rocky has to overcome. And the fact that he doesn't, like, we never see Apollo train in the first Rocky. We never see him show like any sympathy or anything. And even when he wins the match, it's still kind of a loss. It's still kind of a loss because Rocky wins like the girl at the end of the day. So, and again, this is not the Apollo story. It's the Rocky story. So I think that's where the focus is more set. But it's relevant to say that the Apollo Creed has a figure in the representation as well. And that's not, when they were writing, when Stallone was like writing Rocky, his idea of Creed is to represent Muhammad Ali, who was the biggest boxer back in 1976, and how that like flamboyant attitude kind of transfers over. But again, so that's where that representation lies. But then speaking of particularly like people like Malcolm X, Muhammad Ali, it starts to be another wave of seeing those kind of figures portrayed on screen in the 90s. So 1992, the next like big Spike Lee movie was Malcolm X, which is a 3-hour, 12-minute like epic of sprawling through the entire life of Malcolm X, and that movement, and like maybe not 90s, but like right in the 2000s, Ali had first like biopic come out with Will Smith starring. So a lot of times these figures were, instead of becoming like background characters in like white movies, we're starting to actually have some realistic portrayals on screen. And I think that's where a lot of the great black cinema started heading in that time.
Specifically, let's get into Malcolm X a little bit because I know that's such a impactful movie that changed a lot, especially with the real life person of Malcolm X who has a different interpretation based on different people you will ask, right? Because he's not Martin Luther King. Like he's much more controversial than Martin Luther King because it's Malcolm X. He has a different attitude than MLK did. So what did that movie specifically being so well accepted mean to just black cinema in general, specifically with that real life person of Malcolm X?
Right, right. I mean, I think again, this is a movie that had a pretty, maybe not fair, but it had a pretty sprawling look at all of the positives and negatives that preceded in the characteristics of Malcolm himself. And the fact that this movie was funded by, helped funded by Oprah, like, and a lot of other black figures at that time, because frankly, Spike Lee wanted a budget. The studio, Warner Brothers, didn't want to give him all of that budget, so he had to like campaign to get the money himself. He was really like Kickstarter before there was Kickstarter, and Malcolm X is the perfect example of where that ended up leading, and like I said, like a lot of black audiences felt like this is a story that needed to be told for a long, long time, and the fact that Spike Lee made it into such this big, like grandiose, like epic story, kind of, I guess, helps. And this is a great film overall. I think that's what helps it the most. I think the fact that it's a great film, and the fact that a lot of people are willing and open to accepting the greatness of it, and particularly the performance of Denzel in it, just matters more and more. And I think that's also something I kind of skipped over too, is like in the 80s, in the 80s and 90s, we started seeing more black stars come up too, outside of just the filmmakers. We started to see like Denzel come more into prominence. You know, other big actors, Lawrence Fishburne in the 70s and in the 70s and 80s. Again, like still like supporting parts throughout films, but then I guess like in the late 80s, early 90s, more of those faces started becoming more leading roles in a lot of these movies, particularly with Denzel. Denzel's first Oscar was for Glory. That's like the movie about the Civil War. Was it the Civil War or was it World War II?
I think it's the Civil War.
Yeah. Civil War with Matthew Broderick, Morgan Freeman, who's another star who's rising up, and that's a story with a lot of African American faces too. But because Denzel delivers such a powerful performance, with that single tear that everybody always references. I think that's the fact that he was such an incredible actor in that plateaued him into stardom, which plateaued a whole nother era of like these other kind of cool like black movies that we could start seeing, at least like from a representation standpoint. But from a filmmaker standpoint, in the 90s, like I said, we started to get like Spike Lee doing his stuff, but then we all started to see breakout stars like John Singleton when he did Boys in the Hood, and that was the debut of Ice Cube, to the first time we've ever seen Ice Cube on screen. Cuba Gooding Jr. is obviously in that as well. Morris Chestnut is in Boys in the Hood as well. Nia Long. So that movie, and again, another movie inspired by hip hop music. That's a movie that
That's what I was about to say. But
right,
yeah.
right. Because Fight the Power was a big influence on Do the Right Thing, in the sense that it's like the East Coast hip hop, the New York hip hop. LA hip hop was Eazy-E, it was NWA, it was Ice Cube, obviously being in the movie, rapping about the struggle of living their lives on like in the hood and South Central. So
yeah, I mean that was a huge movie too, right? Because that pretty much it gave a different representation of like what you were saying of like a different hip hop attitude kind of mentality of a movie, right?
Right. And it's a well done movie too. And it's John Singleton's first movie right out of college, right out of USC. Fight on. But yeah, he did. That was his first big like film, and it ended up being nominated for best. He was the first African American nominated for best director because of Boys in the Hood. So best director and best original screenplay were the nominations that he received. And kind of backtracking a little bit, but going back to Do the Right Thing, that's also a big problem, right? A lot of people consider Do the Right Thing to be the best movie of 1989 when it came out, even to the point where like Kim Basinger had like got up on stage like at the Oscar ceremony and said that they basically made the wrong choice. And they instead, I mean, I've talked about it on a previous podcast, but they instead elected to give the award to Driving Miss Daisy, which is a movie where Morgan Freeman plays a driver. So like another helping like assistant. So again, that's problematic to say the least, and that's where a lot of African American audience start feeling a certain type of way about having that be the face of what we reflect. And of course, we talked about in the Spielberg episode too, the color purple, also in the '80s too. But now in the '90s, where we're seeing more and more black filmmakers come out and start doing more and more hood movies. So not only Boys in the Hood, Boys in the Hood kind of spawned a new wave where we saw movies like Menace to Society or Juice, and all of these like really prominent hip hop figures like Tupac, being in Juice and a lot of other films, Poetic Justice. But then there's also the fact that particularly with the Hughes brothers doing Menace to Society, that's a movie that actually still influences a lot of what we see in like modern cinema today. With that like iconic like shot of like the beer dropping as like this liquor store gets robbed at the beginning. That's something that sparked such a big debate and such a big like a lot of controversy, especially coming right after the LA riots in like the 1990s. That really carried the narrative of cinema and black cinema to a whole nother wave and a whole nother level. So I think, filmmakers coming from that ilk had their own individual like look and style to what they were trying to present.
As far as like, because I know you mentioned 80s stars, what kind of 90s stars were we seeing rise up?
Right. I mean, that's definitely the start of like Samuel Jackson coming to prominence. And that's part, again, we talked about Tarantino. That's due to the help of Pulp Fiction, really putting Samuel
Because he
Jackson.
stole that movie, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it was supposed to be like, that wasn't necessarily his movie, but it became his movie.
I don't even think he was in the original draft of the script for Pulp Fiction, but I think he had like a meeting with Tarantino, and I know Tarantino had auditioned him for Reservoir Dogs, but like that didn't end up working out. But they were interested in seeing a part for Samuel Jackson, so I think Tarantino even says like he wrote the part of Jules specifically with and for Samuel Jackson. So I think that's really interesting and important, particularly in looking at how Samuel Jackson's career also kind of started from Spike Lee, because Samuel Jackson is also in Do the Right Thing. He's also in School Days, and he's also in and he was also a small part in Goodfellas. That's for
right.
Scorsese too, but like it's interesting, particularly with Spike versus Tarantino, because they've all Tarantino and Spike Lee have always kind of had that clash against each other, in the way that Spike Lee's more than likely upset. Oh, not more than likely, he's very upset that Tarantino uses the N word as much as he uses it, and the fact that he satirizes like black culture so much throughout his movies. Yeah. So particularly with another '90s movie. Another '90s Tarantino movie, Jackie Brown, which is again another play on blaxploitation, but that's a movie that was showing so many characters using the N-word left and right, and that's something that Spike Lee felt like Tarantino shouldn't be representing. But yeah, I mean, in terms of stars in the '90s, besides Samuel Jackson, Will Smith coming off, he's doing his hip hop thing and his TV thing, and he's just starting to break into movies just a little bit more and more until that big breakout with Independence Day.
What year is it? 97, right? 97?
97, I think that is.
Yeah,
yeah. And that's the movie that really was one of the first major blockbusters to embrace an African American like supporting star that wasn't like super like like corny or like Cooney and all that stuff. He was actually like a prominent figure who made a awesome impact upon that movie. So
yeah, Will Smith was huge. Now I'm getting more familiar now, because this is when I'm a kid.
Right.
This is when you're barely being born, but this is when I'm a kid. I'm a kid when Will Smith was a star, and I remember watching Independence Day and being like, "Yo, this is crazy!" And that guy just punched an alien in the face. Yo, this is like me being a kid and watching like Fresh Prince and watching Will Smith become a star. The one that stands out the most for me is seeing him, and I know this is a terrible movie, but seeing him in Wild Wild West. I remember Will Smith in Wild Wild West and him being like the badass cowboy. And being that kind of like, he's a black cowboy, which is something you don't see every day too.
Right. And again, there's other stars like Morgan Freeman, again, doing more supporting stuff, but still holding it down. I mean, Shawshank Redemption was 94. He obviously had a big part, and I mean, he had a big part in a lot of big 90s movies. But particularly with Shawshank, that's a movie where there's like almost no other people of color. And that character isn't even originally supposed to be black. It's supposed to be, he's called Red because the original character is like a redhead Irish dude. But they rewrote it for Morgan Freeman just, because he has such a powerful voice and stature and figure. And again, that's just part of it. I'm trying to think though. What other star? I know you're talking about you were growing up in the 90s. What other like stars did you
I'm trying
see?
to think of it too, because I'm thinking like these are all people that have like Academy Award kind of recognition, but who were the stars though? Like who were the people that were kind of popping off in the 90s, right? Like that's what I'm curious about. Just because I know the 90s. When I think of 90s too, I think of that's when hip hop to me. That's when hip hop really took off. Because that's the era of Tupac. That's the that's the 90s era. That's also like the era of like what we've seen different areas of the U.S. Again, I'm going into a hip hop conversation, but we see different areas in the U.S. kind of develop their own style of hip hop too. Because that's when we see the Southern hip hop come
trap
out.
Music.
Southern hip hop really became huge in the late 90s. I know that because I used to listen to that. And that's kind of what I'm leaning towards. But as far as film goes, I don't know. Who else? I mean, Will Smith, obviously, I just said that. But there has to be other people that came out and they were kind of big in the 90s too, right? I mean, the one that stands out to me, I mean, I'm going into comic books now, but 1998 was Blade.
Oh, Wesley Snipes. That's right. Yeah. Wesley Snipes was a big star in the 90s.
Yeah.
And White Man Can't Jump is...
That's right. That's a big one too.
Yeah, that's actually not only one of the biggest movies when it came out. Fun fact, it's actually one of Stanley Kubrick's favorite movies of all time.
There you go.
It's like a strange little fact. But, that's Stanley Kubrick's. And particularly with Wesley Snipes, he was originally, and we're talking about, comic books and stuff, he was originally supposed to be Black Panther. Like he originally was there to help develop a Black Panther script and wanted to star in it himself. But then after, things fell through, they couldn't find like a good writer and director to tackle it. So he went on to do Blade with Marvel.
Well, here's my thing too. Again, this is coming from me. My connection to Blade. So 1994, I think, is when the Spider-Man animated series came out. And 95, 96, they introduced Blade in the animated series. Because I wasn't reading the comics. I was going off of the animated series, which got me eventually into the comics. But they introduced Blade. They introduced Blade in this animated series, and he comes out and he's killing vampires. He has a samurai sword. He's wearing all black. He's riding a motorcycle. I'm just like, bro, who is this? This is the coolest character that you can ever put on screen. And he comes out in the animated series, and it's with Morbius the vampire, who's like a big villain of Spider-Man, and he's using this technology to copy Peter Parker's spider thing with the vampire bat, right? So it's the same concept of like bitten by a radioactive spider, but now it's bitten by a radioactive bat kind of thing, and he becomes a vampire, which sparks Blade to come out and try and kill Morbius. And Spider-Man's like, dude, don't kill people, because Blade is like rated R hardcore in the comics, right? Because he's much more like Punisher, where he kills people, and he obviously vampires, he kills vampires, but Blade for me was like my introduction of like, yo, this guy's badass. This guy's dope. So I remember being so hype for Blade in the movie theater, and obviously I couldn't see that movie because it was super R and it was super bloody. But that was because again, this comes with my fascination of vampires, and I've gone on various podcasts and talked about vampires. But that was my Buffy the Vampire Slayer. That was my Interview with a Vampire. That was my Blade. Blade was another one in the 90s when vampires were starting to pop off. And here's a vampire, and this is my kind of going back on it. And we kind of skipped over this a little bit too, but my fascination, and I love getting into this stuff because to me it's like I come from the anime with hip hop, right? And when it comes to anime and hip hop, you think of Dragon Ball Z, But
Right.
when you think of Dragon Ball Z is also something that's big in hip hop and big with
Absolutely.
black
Yeah.
people.
That's yeah.
But because it kind of goes hand in hand with hip hop. And again, I come from hip hop. Like that's my family. That's what all we listen to. So we were listening to all these black rappers. But my coming from anime, coming from hip hop, and coming from martial arts. Because my brother who's I've told you before, he raps, and that's where we get a lot
Our
of our
intro
music,
song, yeah.
our intro songs from my brother. But he does hip hop music, and he introduced me to martial arts cinema. Martial arts cinema coming from Bruce Lee, coming from Enter the Dragon, or coming from all these crazy Bruce Lee movies that I grew up with and I loved watching. We saw a lot of black people.
Audiences getting. My grandma is the biggest martial arts fan in the world.
Yeah.
Any movie with like karate, anything with like anything Bruce Lee, anything, anything with shit
Martial
like
arts, yeah.
martial arts. I know that, like now there's that whole like El Rey network that's like owned by Robert Rodriguez, but like during the day they show nothing but like old Asian, or I'm sorry, Eastern like karate movies, like Chinese or Japanese like old cinema. And my mom and my grandma just like watches that all day, because it's the whole idea of having a person who's like a hero who is like non-white, who has like a powerful like athletic ability, and can do action and kick ass. That's something that black people have always gravitated towards. And
Yeah.
you talk about hip hop. I mean, that's a big part of that's a huge part of hip hop. Even back to like the days of like the Jamaican like sounds and stuff on the East Coast kind of starting to influence the way hip hop was consumed there, like in the early '80s, all the way up until like Wu-Tang started coming out, and that's obviously big influence. I mean, their album starts with a clip from the karate movie. I can't remember exactly which one, but then again, so yeah, hip hop has a big part. And I love how you mentioned Dragon Ball Z, man, because not a lot of people talk about how many rappers mention Dragon Ball Z in
there's
their
a lot.
songs.
As someone who's a Dragon Ball Z fan, there's a lot.
Yeah.
As you see Goku and Vegeta in the background.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a big martial arts. And I was thinking about this because I was talking to you because I'm super sleepy and tired because I just rewatched all of Tokyo Ghoul in one night. And I'm thinking about anime. And the more I think about anime, the more I think about anime, specifically like shonen anime, which is like very like heavy martial arts anime and stuff like that. It's all about levels. And that's kind of what hip hop, that's kind of what martial arts cinema brought. So a lot of people don't know about this, and a lot of people do, but martial arts is all about levels. It's all about kind of like, I can't beat this guy up, therefore I have to train harder to beat this guy. And that's all what hip hop is too. It's like, I'm going to be better than you because, I'm coming at you, blah, 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 coming at you stronger, faster, Kamehameha, Super Saiyan, whatever you want to say. And that's what anime is about too, but that's what kind of goes in hand with martial arts.
Yeah.
And that comes, I mean, we've kind of talked about blaxploitation, but that's Bruce Leroy too.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Bruce Leroy comes from that fascination of like a martial artist, but now it's a black martial artist.
Exactly.
So martial arts does play a factor, and that's where Blade came in too.
Right.
Because the reason why I'm talking about this is because of Blade, and Blade is a martial artist, and he fights like Bruce Lee, and he's a vampire, and he's black. And he has a samurai sword.
Right. And that's not to mention the other prominent black star in the night you just brought. You reminded me, Michael Jai White, who is known for just kicking ass in terms of like martial. I mean, he became a huge star with like. I mean, Sparring wasn't like the greatest film, but
Yeah.
like he's known for doing the big like action like martial arts thing. So again, Michael Jai White's kind of the big example of that being that representation of martial arts and black cinema kind of crossing over into what we see in black films.
Yeah, but they really did gravitate towards that Eastern cinema type thing too. I mean, we see it now even with the brand new Migos music video, Stir
Fry, yeah.
I mean, it's all like freaking like Asian culture and stuff.
Yeah,
and
well,
how-
even like Lil Uzi is like
Lil Uzi too,
he's
yeah.
a very like all of his music videos are very heavily like
Anime.
Japanese themed. Yeah. So again, I think that's a big part of it. But going back to I guess the film back in like the '90s too. I totally forgot to mention, but another kind of star another one coming from music, and again that's kind of what a lot of African American stars were doing at the time, were coming from music and coming over to film. and that's of course Jamie Foxx.
Oh,
Jamie
yeah.
Foxx was starting to do a lot of like different romantic comedies. Him and like Vivica Fox have
He had
that
that show
one.
too, right?
Oh yeah, In Living Color. Yeah, him and that In Living Color. Nobody mentions how much In Living Color actually influenced our
It
society.
influenced a
'Cause
lot.
there's no Jim Carrey without In Living Color, and Jamie Foxx as well. But again, that's another like that's another wave of like African American like romance comedies that were just all coming out. And by the way, we forgot to mention like in the 80s too, when we're talking about like big stars in music, other movie stars like Eddie Murphy played a big part
right.
into how we see African Americans represented today. Particularly with Beverly Hills Cop, which is a movie about a black African American guy going into a mostly white Beverly Hills area and still outsmarting everybody and putting himself at the top. And with 48 Hours, which pairs him with Nick Nolte, who is like a notoriously racist dude, and he has to overcome that. So again, I think these are all plights that the African Americans have to deal with in their own cinema. So then, in the 90s, where Eddie Murphy was doing more stuff like Harlem Nights, or I think he did that one with Arsenio Hall. Was Arsenio? I think it was Arsenio Hall. And but just like Eddie Murphy was just flourishing in like all the different movies, Bowfinger, as well. So it's again a lot of what we see African Americans in during that time were like comedies, musicians, or the only real like main, I guess, dramatic star was like
Denzel.
Denzel, and then of course like Morgan Freeman and Samuel Jackson more supporting, but Denzel was like the main carrier of what we see in like the strong like dramatic acting side.
Sure, and I would say obviously we already mentioned it, but Will Smith on a blockbuster side.
Blockbuster side, yeah, definitely
Yeah.
without a doubt, yeah.
So now getting into the early 2000s.
The early 2000s, that leads us. I mean, the 2000s just everything explodes, right? Now we
Yeah.
start to see, because again, this is all like a building thing. We see in the 70s the black exploitation film starting to take off. The 80s, we see filmmakers like Spike Lee coming to prominence, actors like Eddie Murphy coming to prominence. In 90s, we see all of these great different subgenres that are created within black film, but also seeing how black people are representing blockbusters and Will Smith and Denzel, and how that's making a ton of money. So now the market's like a real like open season. And in terms of the filmmakers, we see people like Antoine Fuqua come out of the 2000s, right? He's the guy best known for Training Day, another Denzel movie. In fact, when Denzel won the Oscar for Training Day, that's the first time an African American actor has won Best Actor, one being directed by an African American director. A lot of times, African American directors are, a lot of times African American writers are, African American actors, I should say, African American actors are winning Oscars because they're directed by white men. Obviously, because there's not a lot of representation behind the camera. Or it was like in the case of Spike Lee and Do the Right Thing. The main guy, Danny Afaro, Asario or whatever, totally messing up his name. But the Italian guy in Do the Right Thing, he was nominated for the Oscar, but none of the other cast were. But now it was prominent to see like Denzel working in, and again, a lot of people could debate on whether or not that's a fair Oscar win. Personally, I don't. That was the year also like Kurt Russell was doing Gladiator, right? Is that the same year?
Kurt Russell?
Not Kurt Russell.
Russell Crowe?
Russell Crowe.
Yeah.
Yeah. The same year as Gladiator, right? Something like that.
2000 was Gladiator.
Okay. So it was probably that or A Beautiful Mind.
Got it.
But anyway, I think Russell Crowe should have won that year, and then the previous time Russell Crowe was nominated against Denzel and Hurricane. I think you could have flipped those, and that would have been a lot better. But that being said, no, it's definitely great to see another black director like Antoine Fuqua coming to prominence. We see like other directors like Gina Price Bythewood, who was known for doing who did like Love and Basketball, and does like a lot of other like African American comedies. Halle Berry as a movie star is breaking out to the next level. Monsters Ball came out in 2001, if I'm not mistaken, and and then she just exploded into being one of the. She was even a Bond girl. So again, this is all kind of culminating into what we see today, particularly in representation overall. And you can even look back at the 2000s and look at how the Oscar winners were like divvied up and supported by race. It wasn't even a big deal. Like it was honestly, you just saw you saw people being represented for their performances. You know, I believe there was even a year where in 2006 where Jamie Foxx was nominated twice in two different categories. He was nominated for Best Actor and won for Best Actor, and Ray for playing Ray Charles, and then he was nominated for Collateral. So again, these are all like really nice pieces of, and it was like almost every year we saw another great black performance being recognized and put to the forefront.
Yeah, absolutely. Like this was the era when they were starting to really take off as well.
Yeah,
I'm relating this back to hip hop, but this is like the Jay-Z era starting to come up to the front.
Yeah, and
Kanye starting to come up.
Right, and that's I didn't mention, but like back in we talked about gangster movies back in the 90s with Boys in the Hood, and of course I didn't mention Friday, but Friday's like the comedy version, the parody of the Hood movies, and then and the Wayne brothers doing like their own parodies, like Don't Be a Menace, while drinking juice in the hood. Like
I was gonna ask you about that. We see a lot of stars: Will Smith, Jamie Foxx, Halle Berry. These are people who are diving into the mainstream, who are going more towards like the not. When do we get movies like specifically a black movie? A movie like that's like when like obviously besides Tyler Perry, but movies like Think Like a Man, movies that's late 2000s obviously, but I'm saying like when do we get those type of movies that are very much purpose, like the Chris Brown Christmas movie or something?
Right. Yeah. Again, I think that's all coming in like the 90s. I think the 90s is where we're seeing that. I think that's where
is there one you can name that specifically you can think of that was in the 2000s that were like, oh, that's when we started seeing. Like every year we get one of these movies or a few of these movies.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, I definitely think the Tyler Perry's.
Is it just Tyler Perry?
Diary of a Mad Black Woman. I don't think that's the one that kicked it off, but that's like the instant like recognizable. Like this is like a black, specifically for black audiences, only for black audiences. But again, there was stuff in the 90s. Like I keep mentioning. Jamie Foxx, but he was in a lot of those kind of like little kind of crazy romantic comedies that were like really wacky and over the top, and Vivica Fox as well. She's in a lot of that stuff. Jada Pinkett Smith was also in a lot of those.
When do we see my girl Megan Good come in?
Megan Good. Now that's fire right there. I remember first seeing Megan Good in what was the stomping
Stomp the Yard?
Stomp the Yard. Yeah. That's to me when I first started paying attention to Megan Good.
I forgot when I first saw her, but when I first did, I was like, I mean, she was in a 50 Cent music video.
She was
in 21 Questions, I think.
Oh, yeah.
I
think so. Yeah. My favorite 50 Cent song, by the way.
Yeah, me too. I love that song. And I remember thinking, like, my God, who is that?
Yeah.
But she started to get some popularity as well and started popping up in a lot of movies, too.
Right. And a lot of people just start popping up. And, you know, I'm having a hard time pulling, like, black actresses besides, like, Halle Berry off the top of my head. But, I mean, there's a lot. There's a lot that was moving in that direction. And particularly because of, like, you know, Oprah Winfrey being such a prominent part of the American television like network.
Sure.
Obviously, she had a substantial piece of how we're represented as well, and culture, not just in film, but just in culture in general. But she also got her start in film with The Color Purple. So again, like these are all like moving elements. But in terms of like a defining like movie that is like the point of where we start seeing, I'm not sure if it's exactly like one movie, but I think it's like more of a development kind of deal. And and I think the more and more our society developed in accepting more black movies, we just started seeing a lot more.
Yeah, let's jump into current times now.
Yeah, I mean, you know, you kind of mentioned Think Like a Man. That's, you know, Tim Story obviously directed that, and he has like a legacy of directing, you know, films. Particularly Fantastic Four movies.
Yep.
And you know,
which are not good.
right. Which, you know, is it is what it is. But it should be noted, first African American to direct a superhero.
That's right.
Big budget superhero movie. Maybe they're not the greatest, but hey, the accomplishment's still there. You can't take that away from homie. But in that era, in that like ilk, there's he kind of carved like his lane of like the comedies of that, and particularly with like his work with Kevin Hart. And Kevin Hart is particularly as a comedy actor in the in the 2010s, he shows that that's what a lot of the modern faces want to see. Before there was really like a big Kevin Hart in today's age, like we said, Eddie Murphy in the 80s, and then kind of the 2000s were like the age of like Chris Rock and Bernie Mac.
Because we got Rush Hour too.
Yeah, Rush Hour. Yeah.
With what's his name? Chris
Tucker.
Chris Tucker.
Yeah, Chris Tucker. He actually goes to my church, by the way.
Oh, no way.
Yeah. The guy doesn't act anymore, so I don't know what was his deal. But yeah, no, so again, like comedy has always played a big part into that. But Kevin Hart kind of represents how global the African American comedy films are going. I mean, we look at something like Jumanji now, with Kevin Hart and The Rock. I mean, you could say it's just The Rock, or you could say it's just Kevin Hart. I say it's a combination of both. But how that movie is just platformed into the big like international numbers that it's making, because it's one of the biggest films that came out in 2017, right?
It's still rising, dude.
Yeah,
it's still, I mean, it was like top 10, then top 8. Now it's top 7. I think it's even top 6 now in 2017.
Yeah.
For worldwide box office.
Yeah. No, it's
well,
cool.
Well, Kevin Hart. Now I was thinking about Kevin Hart because I listened to a ESPN radio show called First Take. Mm-hmm. I've talked to you about First Take because I love that show. Right. But he was on First Take on Friday and he was talking about the Super Bowl, obviously. But I was thinking about Kevin Hart and how he's one of those guys too that's he's dived into the mainstream world a lot more, because you do have a lot of like black comedians that every black person knows, but not necessarily white people know.
Crossover, yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
But everyone knows who Kevin Hart is.
Right.
Like legitimately, he's probably the biggest one that everyone knows who he is.
Right. And I think that he definitely plays a part into having like the big international. But I think The Rock also contributes to that as well.
True.
I mean, a lot of people don't know he's half black.
He's half black,
yeah. And he's half like Samoan too.
Half black, half Samoan, yeah.
Yeah. So he kind of brings his own like cultural ilk. He's more of like the Will Smith of like today's era in terms of like blockbusters. I'm going in and out of those. But I mean, that's not to mention the filmmakers of the 2000s that started to come into prominence too. Now we start to see like people like Ava DuVernay, Dee Reeves, who I mentioned before was one of my top 5 directors of 2017. And again, more black women as directors too. I mean, that's crucial. That's important. That's probably the most important part. But because of how the Oscars So White movement kind of started and how it kind of built, now we're starting to see more Academy recognition for these like excellent portrayals of like black cinema.
And we also see too, and obviously this is obvious and it's not going unnoticed, but we also see a rise of like British black actors. The homeboy from The Wire is British. I forget his name, but he's a British guy.
Michael Kai.
I think so, yeah.
Michael K. Williams, yeah.
I think he's British.
Yeah.
Idris Elba, obviously.
Idris Elba,
John Boyega coming into Star Wars. But there is that certain like, because I watched a show called Misfits too, and they kind of have a lot of black actors that are British as well, and that's a British show as well. But there's that kind of like, especially with Idris, because Idris now is like, everyone knows who he is and everyone knows his name.
Right.
But I remember when he was first rising up and he was first like on the come up just on BBC and stuff.
Right.
He was just on British TV.
Right. I think now, particularly, we have a great diversity of backgrounds being represented. Lupita Nyong'o is obviously... she's born in, correct me if I'm wrong, born in Nigeria. Born in...
She's I made a mistake when I had to look it up. No, she's Mexican.
Okay.
She's born in Mexico.
Born in Mexico.
Raised in Mexico but she's obviously
from Kenya.
From
Sorry.
Kenya. From Kenyan parents, yeah.
Okay. Kenya,
or Nigerian parents. I'll look it up later.
It's probably Kenyan. I think it's Kenya.
Yeah.
But yeah, but that's she technically, I mean, she is she represents.
I actually think it's Nigerian. I think that's. I think it's
okay.
Because I read an article about it the other day because I was curious and she talked about it. But yeah, her dad was like this politician in Nigeria who set up apparently a lot of controversial things, and he was like in fear for his life, so he moved to Mexico. And he took his like wife with him and stuff, and then they raised a family in Mexico. He would teach at university in Mexico City. And so that's why Lupita Nyong'o is like Mexican,
Yeah.
and she does press interviews in Mexico in Spanish and stuff. I told you that.
Yeah.
She and Oscar Isaac did the Force Awaken press interviews, and it would be like the two Latinos, our two Latinos from Star Wars. We have Oscar Isaac and Lupita Nyong'o, and it's so funny every time they introduced them because they would both speak in Spanish and interview in Spanish. And it was like the two Latinos characters in Star Wars.
No, I mean, like, literally, I told you this too. Like, when they're doing like stuff for like BET, like it was always Lupita Nyong'o and John Boyega. So she got 2 boxes checked
There
out.
you go.
That's the nice part about it. No, but yeah, I definitely think her star power, and I think just the star power of African American filmmakers just in general now.
Sure.
I think we see this is the period where we're seeing the most African Americans being represented on film than any other time before, on camera and behind the camera.
Yeah.
And we talked about before we start rolling, like Steve McQueen's another big one, right?
Steve McQueen
did 12 Years a Slave and was nominated.
Chiwetel, another British actor.
Chiwetel Ejiofor, yeah, exactly.
Ava with Selma.
Ava DuVernay did Selma.
David Oyelowo.
Yeah, right. David Oyelowo, another British
actor. No, but I'm serious. Though, like
Yeah.
it really is. Like that's something that should be noticed.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
You're like,
yeah.
wait a minute, he's black, but he's British though.
Yeah.
So there you go.
I mean, the British. They just produce the best actors.
Yeah, they really do.
They can't, and no matter how good us American guys are,
You're never gonna beat a British guy.
Yeah. But yeah, no, exactly. And speaking of Selma, that's the first. Talk about how Malcolm X in 1992 was the first time Malcolm X we see him on screen. Selma's the first time we see a fictionalized Martin Luther King ever.
Can you imagine that?
Yeah, after 50
don't get me
years.
started on that movie, man. That movie, when I first saw that movie, I saw it in a small theater, and I saw it like it was not a big audience, but I was like, damn.
Yeah.
That was a movie.
Yeah.
That was a great freaking movie. Where did that come from? And that performance, that guy was Martin Luther King. David Oyelowo transformed into Martin Luther King. And I don't care what anyone says. That's the biggest snub I've seen in forever at the Oscars. Because that was the year we got Bradley Cooper nomination.
Yeah.
For American Sniper. And he was fine in American Sniper, but oh my God, David Oyelowo became Martin Luther King in that movie.
There was 2 snubs that year. David Oyelowo was definitely my number one, but Jake Gyllenhaal for Nightcrawler.
Oh, don't get me started. Jake Gyllenhaal was amazing.
Both of those performances could have easily won.
Yes. Yes.
And they weren't even, nominated, but that's crazy to me. But.
Yeah, that was the year of David Oyelowo, for me, who gave the best performance that year by far, in my opinion. That was obviously Common with Glory as well.
Right. The second, the third time a hip hop song ever won Best Original Song.
Yeah.
The first time, of course, 8 Mile with Eminem, Lose Yourself. Mm-hmm. The second time was Hustle and Flow with Terrence Howard and Anthony Anderson and Taraji P. Henson, which is another like big like.
Who did that song again? Was it
3-6 Mafia?
3-6 Mafia. Yeah. That's hysterical, dude.
It's hard out here for a pimp. That's a banger. But again, that's kind of another like that was almost a new face towards Southern Black life that we've seen before. Like I said, I mentioned like Nothing But a Man back in like the 60s and all that stuff. But this is the first time, I guess, like in modern cinema, modern context with modern hip hop, that we see like a Southern like portrayal of like African Americans. And Terrence Howard, obviously that catapulted him into obviously being a big player in Hollywood. And now he's kind of not, but back in the mid 2000s, he was another big star who was coming up. And Craig Brewer, he's obviously white, but he did a lot of really interesting black films. I don't know if you saw the one Black Snake Moran with Samuel L. Jackson, and I think it was Christina Ricci, and Justin Timberlake's in that too. But that's like another like Southern kind of based film. But yeah, no, the number of African American filmmakers that were just making their own waves, doing their thing. Rick Famigua, is that his name? Who did Dope, and was going to direct Flash.
Yeah.
He kind of got a start in the '90s too, like late '90s, early 2000s with The Wood, which is another movie starring Morris Chestnut, Ty Diggs. And of course, The Best Man Holiday is another one too, directed by Malcolm Lee, Spike Lee's, I believe, cousin or something like that. But yeah, so a lot of different people having like their upcoming and rise in cinema during that
And
time.
it's crazy. I want to talk to you, and I know it's something that this is not planned out at all, but I'm just curious because we mentioned him, but I kind of want to mention him again. What is it? What is it with Tyler Perry?
Yeah, I mean,
What is it? Because he does reach an audience. We saw Medea's Halloween, Medea's Halloween, the first one make a crap ton of money, and then he comes out with a second one with like shot it in like a month or whatever, and it makes a good freaking amount of money, and it's like. What is it with he has an audience? It's stupid to say, oh, whatever, it's just Tyler Perry, because in real life you're like, he makes money though, and he has an audience. I mean, obviously, he has like this weird, because I know a little bit from what is that show called? Boondocks?
Yeah.
Because I used to watch that. It's like the anime show.
Yeah, I love that show, yeah.
But they go hard at Tyler Perry.
Oh, yeah.
Like hard. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, the whole... any like everybody in like black community kind of like if Tyler Perry makes movies for particularly for churchgoers, particularly that's where his main base
really
is.
With all those weird shirtless buff guys though. That's churchgoers.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, I mean it's very like orthodox, clean, like Christian kind of. I don't know.
That's a big part of the black community though.
It is.
It'd be kind of dumb to ignore that though. To be fair.
Yeah, and he found his niche. He's making his money off of it. I personally think, this might be a little controversial. I think he's doing more harm than like good.
As far as quality,
yeah,
or as far as message,
quality,
both.
It's kind of both, man. Kind of both because. I have nothing but respect for Tyler Perry.
Yeah.
I don't want to disrespect the guy. I don't want to if Tyler Perry's listening, he's not listening.
He's not.
If Tyler Perry's listening, I respect the guy as a dude and as a person, as a businessman who like made his own path and started his own studio. I get it. As a filmmaker, there's a lot of problematic things. I can't get over the fact that every single bad guy in his movies are like the dark-skinned boyfriend.
Oh, really?
And yeah, like
I've never seen one. So
yeah, or like the thug like coming off the streets. Or, I don't know, all this kind of. It's very, and then like the light-skinned dudes like, oh, maybe a nice, cool, clean. I don't know. There's a lot that I feel like his movies are doing on a social level that's bad, but also in quality. Because let's be honest, like all the Madea movies are kind of like punchlines at this point for a lot of people, and for some for the audience, it's not. For the audience, they're very, very loyal to Madea. They're very good to the Madea character. I'm just not all for the fact that homie has to like put on a dress to like, get people to watch his film. So I don't know. That's where I stand on that, but. Not the biggest Tyler Perry fan.
Gotcha.
Say that.
I was gonna say, what's wrong with dudes putting on dresses, man?
I mean, no. You put on dresses all you want, but you ain't got to shuck and jive. Like I don't know. Like it's nuts. Like I don't know. His political stances to me are a little weird. So, but that's beyond the point.
All right.
But again, I'm pro more black filmmakers. I'm pro somebody who's like making their money and having their own studio. I mean, The Walking Dead shoots out of studios now. Yeah. So it's like he's doing big things. I have nothing but appreciation for what's going on there. Just as for movies, yeah.
Yeah, because we see a lot of people now take. I mean, obviously it's always been a part of hip hop now, but we see shows like Atlanta too, who taking off as well, and that's
right.
That's another. Atlanta is getting a lot of representation recently because of obviously with the rise of trap music, but we see a lot of shows like that kind of pop up too. And,
right.
The only reason why I bring that up is because you mentioned The Walking Dead, which shoots in Atlanta.
Yeah, and Tyler Perry Studios. Yeah. No, I think that's the biggest.
Someone like a Donald Glover.
Now, Glover coming from Atlanta, from Stone Mountain.
Dude, it's crazy because I remember getting Community.
Yeah.
That was my introduction, right? Community was my thing. I would watch that show with my friends. They were really into Donald Glover. And then one of my best friends was like, hey, do you know he raps? And I was like, he raps? He's really good. And I was like, all right, let me listen to it. And I'm going to listen to his old, like his first mixtapes. And they got me into Childish Gambino. And then obviously now he's sparked off from there into like
superstardom
to the point of like we just saw the Solo trailer. and he's playing freaking Lando Calrissian,
Yeah.
and he's probably gonna draw in a lot of people just because it's Donald Glover. Yeah. That's crazy.
He's the only part of that like trailer
that was really dope. Yeah. He looked dope in that trailer.
Yeah, I gotta say too that's kind of like a side tangent. But when I went to the Black Panther premiere on Monday.
Man, he was there.
Yeah, he was
wearing that pink suit. No, it was
like orange.
Yeah,
orange suit. He was sitting. Me and Christian, man. Christian, I don't know how Christian got these seats, man. Christian, we're literally sitting like Issa Rae was sitting right in front of us. Walton Goggins was like a row back from us. Fucking like Don Cheadle was like on the other like we're at the edge of like this. We're at the edge of one section, and Don Cheadle was at the edge of the other. Craig Robinson on the other side of the balcony. We saw Jon Favreau and James Gunn and Taika Waititi like all like talking to each other, and then like Donald Glover was over in that section too. Anyway, like long story short. When everybody was like walking out and dispersing or whatever, and like they're walking out, and I was just kind of staying in the hallways waiting for people to move out so I can move. I saw Donald Glover like walking by. I was like, I have to make this chance, man. I was like, yo, Donald Glover, you're the man. And he's like, it's just like,
that was good enough for you.
Yes,
you were like, I take it.
My heart was warm.
I'll take that. I'll take that.
Yeah. Nice little nod there. I was just, oh man, that made the night for me, man.
That's crazy. Yeah, that's super cool.
'Cause I knew him since like I'm not a was that mixtape I'm Not a Rapper. It came out like 2010.
Yeah. And that's when I did too. Yeah, same time, man. And you can't top me, bro. No, I'm kidding. No, it's like a competition. No, I knew him before you did, bro. Shut your mouth, man. I'm just kidding.
But now, Awaken My Love is like the biggest musical album out.
But I remember Cul-de-sac. Cul-de-sac was one that mixtape.
I haven't heard that one.
Really? No. Oh, that was a big one. Cul-de-sac was one, and I just remember listening. He would do like
Campfire was like the big album.
Yeah, that was his album too. Yeah. But I remember listening to him when he was doing Freaks and Geeks, and when he was making music videos for that.
Yeah.
And when he was doing All the Lights
remix.
That was one of my favorites.
Yeah,
dude. I freaking love it. I memorized that song.
Yeah.
But now it's crazy how he's kind of like jumped into superstardom now. Obviously, even having Redbone and Get Out, and making performances that people enjoy. It's crazy how like he's reached like a different, like my mom likes Donald Glover. You see what I'm saying? Like he's kind of have that
he's hit like another level.
Where it's like everyone likes him, not just like edgy. I like Donald Glover. No, it's like my mom does, my grandmas do, and uncles do, and stuff like that. So
right.
I just think it's funny, but
but yeah, I guess I mean like you're saying, like so many prominent black filmmakers doing their thing now, and all the filmmakers from the past, like where we're talking. Spike Lee, he's doing a Netflix show, an adaptation of She Gotta Have It.
Did you see Dear White People?
Dear White People, yes, the original movie and the series. And that's another one. I think it's Justin Simmons. Yeah, Justin Simmons. He's another like African American filmmaker who started off doing Dear White People, independently produced, independently like financed. Goes on, it hits it big, and then the Netflix adaptation of it also does like really well and sparks like a lot of controversy. But people who actually watch the show actually turn out to really enjoy it. So.
Yeah, that's definitely because I know Tessa Thompson was in that.
Big breakout for Tessa Thompson.
Yeah,
pretty much a lot of the people in that cast now are.
I remember I was gonna see it. I still haven't seen it. I was gonna see the movie when I saw the trailer. I didn't see the movie and I didn't see the show yet because I wanted to see it.
Movie's next level though. Yeah. To me, that movie is probably I could only really relate to maybe like 5 movies and like ever, and that's definitely one of them. Like
Everybody Hates Chris is in that movie. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. He was in Detroit too.
He's in Detroit. Yeah. He was in The Walking Dead. I like that guy a lot because I met him, and I kind of have a soft spot for him because I had a good conversation with him.
Oh, really?
When I met him, he was like the nicest. I swear, dude. Like that guy. When you meet people who are like actors or whatever, and you kind of go up to them, and they're kind of like, "Hey, man, how's it going? Cool, yeah. Hey, good seeing you, man.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And you're happy because you're like, that's cool. This guy was like. he freaking engaged with me. He was like, "Oh yeah, how's it going, man?" And he just sat with me, and I was like, "Why are you still talking to me?
Yeah.
You're like an actor. Like, why don't you run away already?" Like, I expect like a 1 minute conversation. He gives me a good 5.
Oh shit!
And I was like,
wow.
I'm a fan of this guy. Like anyone who does that. So that's why I support him now and everything he does. So when I saw him in The Walking Dead, because I knew him from obviously from Everyone Hates Chris.
Yeah.
And then I met him, and just when he was famous off that.
Right.
And then he went into The Walking Dead. Like you said, I saw him in the trailer for Dear White People. He was in Detroit. I want him to take off, dude. I think he's such a nice guy. I just root for him because he's a nice guy.
Yeah. No, he's a good actor. He's a great
actor.
Say at least.
Yeah. But I know that movie specifically because it did cause a lot of controversy based on the trailer. Because I remember that trailer came out and people were like kind of mad about it.
Oh yeah.
And it's crazy how easily offended white people are.
No, I think
white people are so easily offended.
I think it's funnier if you actually watch the movie. They address that. They address the whole like, why is it called Dear White? That's a big argument in the movie and in the show. And I feel like people were just like, oh fuck it, I'm not gonna watch. Imagine if it was called Dear Black People.
Oh my god! Every time people say, "Why isn't there White History Month?" Oh my god! Let's stop, man. Let's stop. It's for a group of people who have done so much. They really are offended.
Yeah.
Oh my god! It's like, why are you so offended? I'm offended. Damn it! It's like, what? What are you talking about?
No, but definitely, I say for all the viewers at home, if you haven't watched Dear White People, give that one a chance. Like
the movie or the show.
I personally say the movie first.
Got it. Watch the movie first, then watch the show.
Yeah, essentially the show, like the first 4 episodes of the show are basically the movie again, but with different actors. But to me, the movie is superior to the show, but they're both really good.
Got it.
So I definitely say if you can find the movie, watch the movie.
Got it.
But yeah, no, but again, another black filmmaker, and I think. Like as we like start to close out this discussion.
Yeah, because I was gonna close it out.
Yeah. No, it's just like that. The fact that we now have so many diverse films and diverse filmmakers telling all these like weird and interesting stories of different subsections of African American life, whether that be on film or on TV, that is essential to what the goal ultimately of like representation, like why that whole Oscar So White movement happened in the first place, because there wasn't enough being reflected. And I think now in the fact that we are in 2018 and we can, this is an example, I'm not necessarily criticizing the movie, but a lot of people had some problems with Detroit, with Catherine Bigelow, and with the way that was represented. But the fact that we can have that conversation now, as opposed to, going back to like 1920s, 1930s, where a movie like that wouldn't even be released, the fact that we can at least talk about it is awesome.
I mean, there's a lot, too, that's moving forward now. We see it, especially with the superhero genre. Obviously, we mentioned Luke Cage, Black Panther,
Black Lightning.
Black Lightning. We see Spider-Man Homecoming have Donald Glover. We see Spider-Man who's in love with a Mary Jane that's black. Yeah. I mean, we see a lot of progression with that, too.
And even the new anime Spider-Man thing with Miles Morales.
There you go.
Into
the Spider-Verse, yeah. Into the Spider-Verse, yeah. For me, I think I want to close it out, obviously, by talking about Get Out, because for me, that's the movie that I just love that movie so much. And I told you that just from a subjective level, it's a great movie. It's one of those movies that I'm sorry, objective level. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's just generally a really freaking good movie, and it's a movie that my whole family enjoyed and I thought that was really cool. And what Jordan Peele is doing, I think, is something that's going to be recognized. And I'm calling it now, and I'm going to do it on the podcast because I was going to do it later, but I'll do it on this podcast.
Okay.
I'm going to say it. Get Out wins Best Picture.
Really?
Wins Best Picture.
Okay.
Wins Best
That's
Picture.
a bold prediction.
That's a bold prediction. Some people are like, yo, you just be happy that it's nominated. No, I really do think it's going to win. I think Three Billboards is going to lose some steam because it's just so far away from the account. Even though it's won everything else, I understand that.
Right.
But think about the La La Land Moonlight scenario. I think one of my friends is kind of on board with me because he's kind of telling me how things go. And he's telling me that right now, there's locks in everything. Guillermo del Toro is going to win Best Director. All these other locks are still happening. The actors are locked. Gary Oldman, the Frances McDormand, Sam Rockwell, all those are locks. But when it comes to Best Picture, I really do feel like something like a Three Billboards just isn't going to have enough steam to make it to the finish line. A movie that not enough people have seen, even though it's probably a great movie, guys. I still feel like if there's going to be an upset, which I do feel like there will be an upset, I don't think it'll be Shape of Water. I think it's going to be Get Out.
Okay. I mean, I don't...
You don't agree with me, I don't expect anyone to agree with me. But I just have that feeling. Again, we didn't expect it with Moonlight, but I think people are going to put quality over everything else, and I think Get Out would win that battle.
Yeah, just to stay on Moonlight just for a little bit though. Mm-hmm. That's another like seminal movie I think in African American history, right? That's another one that shows a different perspective in the representation of.
Yeah, because it's black and gay.
Yeah, which is something we see. We see that a lot.
Is that still taboo in the African American community?
For a lot of people, it was. I mean, to be frank, there's a lot of conversation. Particularly when that movie came out, of how people wanted to see themselves reflected in that film. But I think beyond just it being about being gay, it's about the black experience in general and black masculinity and all of that, and all of that stuff. So I think that's moreover to more universal sense. But I think that's another point of discussion is the fact that 12 Years a Slave wins Best Picture, Moonlight wins Best Picture. These are all movies about like struggles or slavery or being gay, but Creed doesn't get nominated at this time moment yet. So there's still room for improvement,
massive room for improvement.
Yeah.
That's why I do feel like it'll start with Get Out. And that's why I'm predicting my prediction.
All right.
Yeah.
Get Out.
All right, guys. Hope you guys enjoyed that podcast. Let us know what is your thoughts on this conversation. Let us know what you think about the Academy Awards. Let us know what you think about the history of black cinema in general. We appreciate you guys. We thank you guys for listening to this conversation. We hope you enjoyed it. We hope you learned something from Professor RB3. He's now a professor now. He's teaching us stuff. Guys, we appreciate you guys. Any last thing you want to say?
Nah, man. I think we had a great discussion. This is nice that we're kicking off Black History Month.
Yeah. And this is totally a Tuesday, guys. Don't listen to the...
Super Bowl's already over.
It's a Tuesday, guys.
Yeah. Super Bowl's already over.
This is a Tuesday.
Eagles already won. Eagles already won.
Let's not go there. All right, guys. Thank you for listening to the Meaning of Podcast. I am Ace.
This is RB3.
And we're peacing out, guys. Peace out.